Hello, everybody. This is Pastor Willie, and this is the encouraging word for today. When we face suffering in our life, it can either destroy our faith or it can strengthen our faith. And the key is to understand why we are suffering. In fact, the key to living a victorious life in Christ is to have a proper understanding of suffering, why we are suffering. Now, asking that question, why am I suffering, leads some people to walk away from the faith. But they ask the question not to try to find out the answer, but because they have an expectation that if they follow Jesus, they will never suffer. Never suffer. In fact, they may have even been told that in a message they heard online or a message they heard in church or by somebody that they listened to. So their question is, why am I suffering? It's not to find out why, but it's to ask a basic question. I shouldn't suffer if I'm a Christian, so why am I suffering? So therefore, this Christianity, following Jesus deal, does not work. But they're living a false doctrine. And doctrines that are false have consequences. So their faith is built on a false belief. The belief that Christians will not suffer. So I want to give you some key understandings. And the first key understanding is to understand that we will suffer. In a broken world, there is suffering. So that's understanding number one. Followers of Jesus are not exempt from suffering in this world. So suffering will happen to everybody. Basically, you would have to throw away the entire Bible to actually believe that Christians don't suffer. Jesus suffered on the cross. Paul, as we will see today, suffered. Many people suffered in the Bible. So understanding number one is that there will be suffering in this life. That leads to the question of, why am I suffering? In other words, the question why, to understand why this suffering is happening to me. And there are several reasons. Number one is some suffering is caused by our own sin. When I sin, there are consequences. David sinned with Bathsheba. He was a follower of God. His heart was all after God, but he suffered consequences from his sin with Bathsheba, adultery. In fact, God allowed those consequences. His drama that developed in his family with Absalom and others, and then the death of Absalom, it was a huge amount of suffering that he had. So some suffering is caused by our own sin. In fact, in 1 Peter 4:15, Peter, who suffered, says, if you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or thief or any other kind of criminal or even as a meddler. In other words, don't suffer as a sinner, because when you sin, you're going to suffer. The second reason we could suffer is some sin is caused by the sin of others. Again, think of David and Bathsheba. Many people suffered because of David's sin. A baby even died. Not Absalom, but Bathsheba's husband, Uriah the Hittite, he died. Many other people died as a result. Many people suffered as a result. I'm sure Bathsheba suffered. So some suffering is caused by the sin of others. A husband leaves a wife. She didn't do anything, but she's going to suffer that separation and that pain. A car runs a red light. A little child is walking in the crosswalk and is killed. The whole family is going to suffer. The child is going to be dead. So that's the second reason we suffer, because of someone else's sin. Third reason is we suffer because of the broken nature of the world. We're no longer living in the Garden of Eden. It will come back when Jesus comes back, but right now we're no longer in the Garden of Eden. We're between the Garden of Eden and the return of Jesus Christ. And in this period that we live in, called the end times, we live in a broken world. An earthquake happens. Many people suffer, followers of Jesus and non-followers of Jesus. There are wars, and innocent people suffer. There's also the finite nature of our bodies. Our bodies age. Our bodies break down. Everybody in the history of mankind has died. And you die of something. And you suffer before you die. Paul said, for him to die is gain. To live is Christ. And then there's a fourth reason, and that fourth reason is addressed by Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 11 and 12. Here's what he says. And of this gospel I was appointed a herald and an apostle and a teacher. That is why I am suffering as I am. Yet this is no cause for shame, because I know whom I have believed, and I'm convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day. Did you catch that? He says, that is why I am suffering as I am. He was suffering. He was in prison. He was suffering. Why? Because he was a follower of Jesus. Because he was spreading the gospel. We will suffer. If we truly follow Jesus, we will suffer. We'll be rejected. Some people will be imprisoned. Some people will become martyrs and be killed. People will reject us in our life. We will suffer as followers of Jesus. And Paul realized the reason he was suffering, he wasn't a murderer. It wasn't his own sin. It was because he was a Christian. That's why he was suffering. In fact, he tells us in Philippians chapter 1, verse 29, he's talking to the church at Philippi, for it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him. So we will suffer as Christians. But then Paul says, yet this is no cause for shame. We shouldn't be ashamed that we suffer for Christ. That's a badge of honor to suffer for Christ. In the days after the apostles, people were martyred, and they considered it an honor to be killed for the cause of Jesus Christ. There's no cause for shame. If you suffer as a sinner, it's a cause for shame. But if you suffer for Christ, that's cause for a crown, not shame. And he said, because I know whom I have believed. You see, this type of suffering is not going to affect his faith. It's going to strengthen his faith and build his faith, and will build your faith also. And he says, I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him. And so as you go through suffering as a Christian, know that God will keep you. He will guard what you entrusted to him, your life. And your faith will get stronger and stronger. And then Paul says, He will be able to guard what I have entrusted to him until that day, the return of Jesus Christ, the blessed hope when Jesus returns and there is no more suffering, no more tears, no more cries, no more sin. The old has gone, the new has come. So, my friends, understand why you are suffering. Deal with it if you have to, if it's your sin. But if not, rejoice in your suffering for Christ. God bless you. I will see you tomorrow.